Okay, just a quick note on blocking inside of these tubes. I'm just throwing construction adhesive on the edges that will intersect with the curve, and it's the most effective use of the adhesive. No use filling this entire surface. You certainly could, but I don't think it's necessary. And just some PL fast grab or whatever here. I am installing them vertically. I mean, in this case, it's practically a square, so you could have put them on these edges. But as far as this other blocking for the gussets, 2 long beads of adhesive, and I just stick that down. Now that I can see that I'm centered on my mark here, and you know, I make a couple of lines there to help me, and I put a pair of screws just a couple inches in from this end, a couple inches in, so it's a 12-inch piece, so at 10 inches I put a couple screws, and then I just cut that in half and put a couple screws in that location. And really they could be backed out once the glue hardens, but these two wind up underneath the flange of the gussets those angle braces. The other two, I've just been leaving them. I'm not that hard up for screws. But as far as locating these blocks, I actually put the screws through these bands first, and I'll show you what the bands do in a second. But then I've just been looking inside here, and I'll just sort of place those, you know, centered in the overall length of the thing and what have you. And then I'll just back the screws out quick and then suck them back into this block, pulling it up to the glue engages, making sure that it's tight. And I can see this kind of sit down a little. And then I'm sure that I'm into this blocking. And so that band, you know, you could use plumber's tape, it's called. It's just a long, thin strip of steel with holes in it. Would be a little bit cheaper, I guess. But where are these things? These are going to be at the box store, hanging up by the lumber, all different fish plates and straps, sometimes used for bracing a floor system, sometimes used for reinforcing a joist that you have to hack up for plumbing purposes, any number of reasons. But these are the shortest ones. I didn't go with real heavy either. They have some real heavy, thick ones. These are the shortest ones. They weren't quite enough to go up and over. So the way that band works is that it traps the other end of this weight. These thin weights are more than enough in triplicate here. I've got the bottom end of them in that customized drip edge, and then they sit against the tube and that loop, and with that loop you can push this weight up through this hole under the loop and then sit the bottom of it back into there, and then I made sure that you can go back up into the loop and come back down and out through the hole, which puts the loop, and we'll look at this later when it's assembled, it puts the loop top surface flush with the top corner of the weight, is essentially where that worked out with you know, using this next longer strap. I just measured those and gave it a little more. So I think those are 4 inches. This is like 4 1/4, whatever. And then I basically just divided what was left and put the next bend in the middle, so it's as tall as it is, as wide as the flange is. And I just checked that worked with our approach, angle of approach and everything. It's just a clean and economical way. And I just made these in the vise. So that'll be the simplest. And like I say, you could use plumber's tape and just a loose loop or try to shape it too. But I wanted something a little more substantial that would hold its shape. And I had thought, because you can buy simple handles like about like this, but their dimension in this way is just a little bit too small. So I ended up having to make my own. They were like $6.50, maybe $7 each, and these are less than $1, I want to say, for the shortest ones, and just about $1 for the longer. So obviously significant savings there. And glue's dried over here. We had a little what do we call that, crash test, so we learn what it can and can't take. You wouldn't want to really ask too much of that surface right now. And so that may be all the more rigidity we can get for this show, and any more of an investment, you know, of either time or money. Even just the glue, you know, we've been through almost 1.5 gallons with lamination and everything. So, but if we're coating all of these, you know, this much times 6, it really adds up to another couple gallons anyway. So we'll see just exactly what we're going to do here for hard coat. But as of right now, oh, and I did set that up and pour glue in it and clamp it overnight, so hopefully that'll be enough. And I am actually thinking this scooter design may work for the tower. The tower top is another set component that we're going to pivot into once we get a bit further on these trees. And that is supposed to look like the top of a like Rapunzel-esque tower in the clouds. And so it's got a balcony on it. And I'm just thinking that building one of these scooters much larger would make a nice low profile base to keep it from being tippy. And so I'm going to explore that potentially. But basically that would mean that I would need an 8-foot roughly circle, if not a little smaller, of this double layer plywood, which would have me putting 2 full sheets down and then laminating 2 full sheets the other way onto them to create enough of a thing to cut a big diameter circle scooter out of it. It would probably need at least one wheel in the middle as well. And I'll have to make the surface of it, either black it out and then add a little fluff to it. We're going to use fog around this whole thing too, that I'm talking about building. Anyway, just in doing this first, it has me thinking about how to approach the rest of the set, and that's a good thing. So learning as we go. All right, we'll see you. All right, here is the final mechanical geometry before I start to cover this all up. I've got, I'll show how to lay out one of these pots for the caster wheels, I guess, in another video, but I took the time to plot out on the other one, I guess, the circle of the bearing of the caster wheel. And so then I was sure that I was avoiding it with this fastener, which is a self-tapping screw. And I was using these brackets, and the tube was engaging the pot just about this much. It's the same ratio, even though this is a bigger tube. So long story short, even though I haven't got the 3.5 inch diameter bearing line on here, I know that I can use this outside point of this bracket here. The other two are quite obviously within the footprint of the bearing, and so I wouldn't use those two holes because it's quite likely that it would poke a hole in the bearing and frig it all up. So I used construction adhesive on this bottom surface. I tacked this one with a self-tapper, and then I put the 2 lower and 1 upper screws into the 2x4 that's in here in all 3 locations. And then we've got the customized drip edge like foot holder for these weights, and then that custom strapping that I bent up in a vise. And so again, you can go up into that loop and then down through this hole, as well as going up through the hole and, you know, over and down into here, just to load this up with weight. And the hole being big enough at the diameter for this weight is nice, but also it's kind of big enough for your whole hand to get up in here. And again, get a hold of the nuts if you're trying to take the wheels off of these things, if you need the wheels back for a different set. So that's how these will all be constructed inside. And then you've got to lay out, I looked at the cardboard, I think, on the floor, but I get it all sliced up into what I'm calling like a grass skirt, because I'm leaving the last 3 inches or so. And in the case of this piece of cardboard, there was a body line fold right here, and so you're going to want one there, one way or the other, basically. And then I curled it this way. So to start with, I oriented my strips at 90 degrees to the corrugations, because as an example here, we're going to roll these strips all the way up tightly, all the way up to the top. You can see how it's kind of still, you know, remembers that. But that breaks this all up to be freely formed at every basically body line that these have. So it's a waste of time if you don't get the orientation of the cardboard correct. So then, because of that orientation, it doesn't want to curl around the shape of the tree terribly easily, because you're rolling up the long way, or you're trying to get it to bend the long way. So I pre-roll it up a lot smaller than the curve of the tree, so that when we get over here and we do the curve of the tree, it does it without fighting me, basically. And again, we scribed a line on here at the same elevation using a pen on a stick over there. And this one I moved down probably a foot. I think we're at 36 inches here rather than 48, like on the other tree. So the other tree takes 48 inches practically to do the curve. And this is going to happen a lot shorter, like 12 inches sooner. And the diameter of the tree is that much greater. And I think altogether it'll make it a different sort of species, slightly different form. I've checked that the curve from this line over the weight and out to this extent here leave enough room, you know, in that space to operate all the, you know, come and go with the weight and all of that. So I'm pretty happy with 36 inches here. And so these are the same length strips that we used for the 48 inch curve. And so they'll be far too long here. There'll be a fair amount of waste, but it's what I had for a box, and it's not a big deal I don't mind leaving it long and then I'll hack it all off when I'm done. I'm gonna get some help to move this up to working height on the counter so I can work right in front of me rather than crawling around on the floor. But the next step is to put this around at that line, basically flush, and staple it in, and then start rolling these all up from the bottom so you get that kind of outward curve, and then start pulling them and sticking them with staples to the edge of the plywood all around like we looked at the other one. And then here's some different weight paper, messing around with bark texture. So this lighter weight paper is going to be nice for a finer bark, and this medium paper is kind of making a nice medium bark. I'm not sure it totally looks different right now. But to catch the highlights on this texture and catch the highlights on that texture, especially using different colors, especially on different trunk diameters and different root geometry, hopefully all of that comes together to give us a wide variety, a much wider variety than 2 different tube sizes or 3 different tube sizes. So that's the goal there. And I felt like there was one more thing. Oh, we have a heaviest paper. So those are the like light and medium. We have this real heavy. It's hard to probably see on. It's quite heavy. So I don't know. It might be a real pain in the ass to crinkle it up effectively. It might be something that we get wet. And I'm still toying with the idea of making wheat paste or white glue paste, or just using more water and wood glue, which is essentially the same thing. But soaking these through and through with gloves on to apply them. Because I think it not only would it stick down with that, it would also harden up with that all in one fell swoop. The problem becomes, if you stick this down, how to saturate or coat it without physically mushing down the lovely texture that you get. So if you can get this to stay functional while wet and put it down just how you want it and then leave it alone, might be a better goal. But we are looking to work on them horizontally and pull a full 12 feet of texture paper out. And so we'd have to get that wet. And mostly our body lines, we want them to be longitudinal or aligned to the long axis of these. So the crinkle and twist that we're doing to the paper is one long kind of like paper turd. And so to soak that, you need a long trough of some kind, and you have to fill that volume with that water and glue. And the next thing you know, it becomes kind of a hassle. So we may make that long twisted like paper turd, and then at least try and do like a half of a 55-gallon plastic drum or some large shallow vessel, and just in a loose large arc circle wind it up in there and get it under wetness there, and then bring it back out like a snake kind of coming out of a basket or whatever, and get it back out over a drop cloth, open it up, not fully, but then set it down and push the low points down to get them to contact and adhere. Leave the high points to set up. That's the whole theory, but we'll see how it works out. That's going to be something I want to be ready for basically with everything. Now that we're done proving out the mechanical aspects and stuff like that, now we're down to straight replication as far as I can tell. I am going to play a little bit with this diameter today to cut it to 12 feet and stand it upright and really decide on some of the things that I've been waffling on that I've already mentioned. But as far as the small and the medium trees, it's basically just banging out what we've proved out, getting that work done. Anyway, the point is we'll hold off on the bark until we're ready for bark on everything, I think, or at least on both small and both medium trees. Maybe that'll be the thing to do. But because we're going to need quite a bit of working surface, quite a bit of tarp, and we're working on a timeline and with water and stuff, so it'll be kind of all hands on deck. But it's going to be a couple more days, I think, till we get there. All right, we'll see ya. Okay, we got another pair of 3/4 inch plywood sheets getting glued up. I guess I used about a third. Maybe like, yeah, a third of the gallon of glue for the first time. Just what I needed for the second time, leaving, I don't know, a little less than a third, so I may have been a little heavy. I think the second glue up was heavier. So I guess you could put 2 sheets together with about a third of a gallon, or, a gallon will get you about that much. Just FYI. I didn't really know how to call it. I knew I was going to do some laminating, so I just grabbed a large size, and I would have, we're going to need more than that too. So anyway, here's the medium-sized scooter that we got out yesterday, or left glued upside down. That's looking good. And then we've got the other one of the small ones there, and we've got this one up on the bench. So what I did here was I got a big TV box, I think, or this might have been, can't remember exactly, but large sheets of cardboard, and I made sure that I'm cutting strips out of it in such a way so that the corrugation is going at 90 degrees across these. So I made sure of that, and I took stock of where I wanted to be roughly. Now, the curve ends there, but I have this much more strip because it won't hurt. That added thickness and everything, and the tiny little bit that it adds before we get up to this diameter won't hurt to carry that arc really smoothly into that shape. So a little bit more was, better than nothing, or it wasn't a waste, I should say. And actually that length of strip was 1/2 of this box. So that was another way in which I chose to, we were going to get 3 courses out of the box, but 2, we could certainly do that. So then I decided where on the tree I wanted it. Those are about, I think, 50 inches long. So I think I came down to 48. for the top edge of the cardboard on the tree itself, which left me enough length, but wasn't wasteful with that little tab that is hanging off. There's enough there, but not too much. And so that was just a factor of finding a place to stick a scribe, stick onto this here, just like that. It's actually handier than in a lot of places to find something like this here. But then I just put the marker tip at 48 and, took the cap off, came over. The nice thing about them on the caster wheels, so I just spun it and drag into the nib rather than pushing into the nib, which will just frig it all up. So sweeping across the nib and just spinning it around gave me a marker line at the right elevation. So then I went around with this like grass skirt. I didn't cut these through all the way. We went and made marks at 1.5 inches down both edges of this, and I had a student help me snap all the chalk lines. Then I just sort of stood on this and put some plywood under it to back up the cut, and was sure to cut through the top edge, because I can do that. Another trick with drywall is that you'll notice that when you plunge and cut down, you'll cut right out from this edge, but when you carry a blade out the back edge, it's difficult to finish the cut out. It's just less likely that it fully cuts it. Anyway, long story short, I started up there and was sure to cut the very edge and pulled it to just short it by a couple of inches, and just did that by eye. And so these are a little bit wiggly, it's good practice. It also isn't super important. So anyway, we get like this grass skirt thing, and I attach the uncut edge of it all the way at the marker line all the way around, and then I start to see that these larger curves around the casters, I put a strip sort of on the high point and then played them out to either side. And on these smaller ones, I put one on the high point and played them out to either side. And that crotch actually ends up without a strip on it in every case. And that's so that I can, group these lobes and start pulling them into the diameter of the tree. So if you can imagine, this cross section through here is this circle again, which is smaller than this circle here, and then with this tape I pulled it essentially tangent and melted it right into the curve of the trunk inside the tree, over to there and over to there. And I do that here too. Now the thing is, you have to be at different elevations so that they'll pass, but I sort of pick the same elevation roughly by eye for the large three lobes, and then the smaller ones I'll just be one upper, one lower than that. And this is basically just to hold them here for gluing purposes. These will be able to be cut free later when all of this is one complicated shape, and it won't matter that there's tape inside. We can just hack it out of our way if we need to. And so that's given me this situation here. And then I think I'm going to probably soak this as a substrate layer. I'm going to soak this paper towel that they use around here, and actually, what I might do is just mist this with Super 77 and lay this onto it and just float in and around these corners and just get one surface that doesn't have gaps down into there. Play it out onto the whole thing, which is Super 77 paper towel. And then I'll trim this nice and clean like I was talking about. And I'm going to go around on the outside of this with tape here to sit that down and here to blend this edge kind of better than that. And then I think I'll probably mix up, I don't know, I think straight wood glue is just too thick. It is very similar to a good quality exterior paint, so it ought to go through my paint gun, but I might do 50-50. I'm going to need more glue here anyway, so I might buy a couple more gallons and pour some into here and pour some into something else and come up with 50% glue, add the rest in water, shake the daylights out of it, and that might be what I'm going to spray some percentage of water and glue out onto that paper towel. And I want to saturate the cardboard and the paper towel, and I'm using Ramboard tape to do this operation in here. Since I wanted a tape because it can stick right to the, I thought about string and stuff, but then it's going to wander up the curve, so the tape is working nicely. The Ramboard tape is essentially like sticky paper, and so I expect it to take on water, and it's like that papery packaging tape. I expect it to take on water, moisture content in the glue, and when the glue dries, for that to be right impregnated into it then, and so everything is sort of like one and the same. I don't want to apply glue to all these things and have it, on the outside of this tape but not permeated into the cardboard. I want everything to become wet with glue and then harden up, and then it's all one solid thing. So that's the goal here. And at that point, we can look at what paper we like to do the bark texture and we'll probably do bark texture with it lying down over drop cloth. We'll prop the far end of it up, and we'll work in sort of thirds, probably the top third, and when we're happy with that, we'll rotate it and do the next third, and then one more time. You can follow that. So one of the issues became how to set these bricks, these steel bricks, in as counterweight. I had hoped to put them in, I'll see if I can do this with one hand, but I had hoped to put them in here. And this, I'm also far out in front of the other assemblies with this one. Again, using it as a prototype, because to start with, the tape is in the way of loading it in to prove this out. But essentially, long story short, setting it in here like this breaks the plane with the corners of the steel, or it comes too close. It's just an unfortunate sort of situation. So, to the same extent, to be able to push the brick in, it was going to be hard to reach up in here and turn it 90 degrees anyway. So if it just comes straight up in here and sits back like that, that'll be just fine. But how to keep it from, when you're rolling this around, you know, the last thing I want to be sweating whatsoever while I'm sitting in the house watching the show is that this gets jostled, falls down and starts dragging on the floor, and then runs away and jams. And, you know, it's just, there's nothing you can do until you stop the whole show, come over to the edge of the stage and like reload it or tip this thing over and try to do something. So what are we going to do to be sure that that's not an issue? I'm going to construct these. I'm going to create, what do I want to say? I'm going to prototype how we're doing this early so that we can mess around with these week after week. And if we have any failures, that'll be when we have failures. The more time you can give yourself to use something and shake it down, basically, the better. Nothing that most people don't realize, but we actually had a caster fail for a previous show we did, Little Shop of Horrors, and it was mostly like residential walls that were in footprints that would give them enough points on caster wheels to stand upright, but they were very thin wall segments, and they rolled all around out here on caster wheels. And I had a wheel break down, the rubber on it broke down and like came off, and that was during a rehearsal. And we actually rolled the whole assembly over the hole here. We took down the posts and stuff, but it could sit on its wheels over there and over here, and this could sort of hang in space, and I could make a repair working right here, which is another place we could come and go with the weights here or the wheels here, is over the hole in the stage. And so I was able to do that, but then I was really nervous watching the show that we would have that same type of failure. So anyway, we want to see that obviously before it's showtime. So I went and looked at some perforated steel angle and some other stuff that's relatively pricey, or U-channel and stuff, but it just was going to end up adding up to too much, because if we need a 6-inch piece roughly to hold the weight, because we've got to get over the hole, got to bridge this hole enough. We can't obscure the very widest section of the hole, because that's where the widest portion of the weight has got to come and go. So it's a 5-inch diameter hole. I think the weights are a little over 4 inches wide. And so right through the center of the hole, we have to maintain an opening. And so then we need to get across that opening and anchor whatever we're using down into the plywood before we encounter the surface of the roots sweeping back here. So it's kind of a tall order. But the most cost-effective thing was to get drip edge, because it essentially is the shape that we need in cross-section, but it's $10 for an 8-foot stick instead of like 30, 40, 50 bucks for an 8-foot stick. So I can bend this tab up on the back of it, which is what I have been doing here to make a U. And this, you know, but I got galvanized steel rather than aluminum. The aluminum could be had in black and stuff, which I thought looked more professional, but no one's going to see it inside here. And the screws that I'm going to hold this down with, and the span that it's doing across this hole, I feel better about using sheet steel than I do about aluminum. So galvanized steel, kind of a quick U shape, cost effective. I can use the self-tapping screws that we put the L brackets into the pots with to hold them down, because they'll cut through this and they'll zoom right into the plywood. So then I just have to come up with what the actual piece looks like. And I was puttering around to, you know, relieve the corners here. And this is my prototype that got kind of monkeyed up or something, but it did the job. So then I started to refine this. So we went with curves rather than a straight cut. And, you know, we figured out what the width here was. And then I broke these sharp pointy corners here, and those corners back there, I just snipped them at 45-degree angles. So they're not dull, but they're not ultra sharp. So that's good enough. And now I need just to make 3 of these per tree, because it just goes in like this, and it sits up front right behind the root ball, and then there's enough meat to zip a screw into either side of it. And you want to be careful that it's clocked correctly so that the plane of the weight sits kind of smooth and tightly against the tree. But then you can come through the hole and sit back into that channel, and it should sit there without an issue. If I need to do further controls, I may need to just put like a simple steel handle for like a gate or a door. I could just stick one of those in each of these three locations. Something large enough, like a big steel three-sided loop, that the end of this would slide through easily, or anything roughly this size, and that would just keep it from, you know, from tipping away or rocking side to side. The problem that I'm going to have is that the screws that I use to put that on here with are only going to grab into this cardboard tube, and so if I'd seen that coming, I could have put some blocking inside. It's just one of those things. In fact, the nicer thing to do would be to probably go through it with nuts and bolts. So we'll have to see what ends up happening, but that's what's on my mind there. And you can see here, going from these baggy strips, which I installed basically tightly from here to there, because I knew I could pull the last little bit of flex out of them, and that would fight me and give me like the profile or the silhouette that we're looking for here. But I think overall, when we get a surface on that and it starts coming and going, and it's got wood glue like hardening it, kind of like a really hard paper mache, then we'll have the smooth substrate, and we can start crinkling up paper to build bark up on it. Huh? Do you believe me? Can you see it? I can see it. And then if I'm loving how that goes, I'll be more comfortable setting helpers on the task of getting this far with these other two. And then I've got to replicate my work here, and then I've got to design and create the pattern for the largest size, which is yet to come. Now the thing about that is, I think one half is going to be tree, and the other half is going to be smooth, to be more like Under the Dragon's Lair. And we had these set up today with these like chains and cuffs and stuff that hold up the prisoners that sing backup for the dragon. And we might do like just two big stone columns, almost like, I think I said this in the first video, like under the where they run into the troll in Lord of the Rings, or wherever they're under the dwarves' mountain, where they run into the Balrog. It's just sort of like implies that there's a really high ceiling up there somewhere. And so these will just be finished with some kind of gray and maybe one or two horizontal little seam lines, so like a dark line, and then like a slightly lighter line below it to imply like the top edge of circular stone components to this pillar. And then the bottom will have to flare just like the trees flare, but I'd like to see it flare to one half of a circle rather than this wandering root ball shape. And so if that suits us, that would mean that I wouldn't cut this root ball shape on one half of this thing. So we'd decide, you know, does that mean that it's one half of the circle, you know, because is it from this point to that point, and it's a perfect hemisphere? Because that's we'll do the same method, but it'll carry that line smoothly. And then to face that toward the audience obscures the fact that the tree's on the other side, and vice versa. It's not totally going to fool people, but it is important to decide before I make the pattern for the base for these. And these are the 2-foot ones, because we're talking about making it from the 30-inch diameters. And those aren't as sharp and smooth and perfect as all these other specimens. These have seen the most wear and tear. That one's got a dingle in its kerdingle there, or whatever you want to call it. And it's overall a little bit warped. So is that the best look for implying stone? No, it's a better look for a tree. I think that'll mean that before I decide what to do with the base, I'll cut these down to 12 feet, and I'll get the best section of 12 feet that I can find in here. I'll cut that down, and we'll stand them up and look at them and see if they're anything close to, and these are factory ends too, so I'm going to have to do a really nice job of cutting those ends on there. And then if we like them just fine and they'll work for stone pillars, that's what I'll do. Now, if they won't, and we're going to do it with the mediums, then I hate to say it, but it will mean that I need to add some of these negatives back to this thing. It'll be ugly. I'll do it because it's the economical thing to do. It really makes me want to remake this shape with a half circle. And I would do that with the other one that I have to make, but I think I would have to just add back pieces to that to make that work, which isn't the end of the world because it would be strong. It's just not as elegant as all this has been so far, I like to think. So maybe we'll use the medium trees as pillars on the other side. I don't know. Anyway, that'll get us all of the settings other than a handful of things like I mentioned in the first video, so I won't go back through it. But these are the things that I want to decide on before I waste any more effort. And so for right now, we're going to go a little bit further, make sure this thing looks tree-like and moves and can be weighted and unweighted, and the method's kind of, you know, solid or whatever. And then we'll continue to build on it rather than building on mistakes, because that's the most costly. That's the costliest thing that you can do, is just think you're being so good and work like factory style before you're sure of anything. So anyway, the silhouette's looking better. I'm getting excited. I want to see this all one color and see the light throw shadow on it. This has actually been not keeping me up at night, but I've been excited to get back here every day and prove this out. This is something that's been floating around in my head for a long time, and I think it's pretty polished just because of that. But there is a last little bit of shine to put on it by just doing it, you know. So thanks for watching. We'll see ya. All right, well, that'll sort of finish me out today. I just wanted to see this sort of, like I was saying, it's one surface. So a bit of paper towel, a bit of spray glue right on top of the cardboard strips that we were feeling good about, just to make sure that the surfaces that we've sort of created with this loft are, you know, looking along the lines of what we were hoping for. I think they are. I think that there's an opportunity here to change a few things, but if we do so between all the different trees, well then that will be so much the better, because they'll have a little bit of more variation. And we're working with exact copies in terms of the two pieces of each size, so a little bit of customization or a bit of uniqueness to each will help us break that up and give it more of an organic appearance. Anyway, now I'm going to mix up the water and glue tomorrow and get this soaked out with the paint gun, so that the brush and stuff like that, you could do that. I'm going to use the paint gun because I have it, and I think it'll be fast as well as not too upsetting. The moment that gets wet, I'm sure it'll be just kind of like toilet paper, and any of the places that aren't backed up, if you're poking with a brush, you can just poke right on through it probably. So to just saturate that and let it soak down into the cardboard, through the cardboard into the tube, through the cardboard into the plywood, all around the edge, and then I'm going to run a fan on it and stuff, get it to set up and become rigid. Then this is that gusset, like I was saying, that holds the trunk normal to the base at least, and then everywhere you take the base, as long as it's on a flat surface, the trunk will be a nice, essentially 90 degrees from that. And the strength is in this then, once it's all been wetted out with glue and that glue dries. And then you don't need any of the tape or any of the L brackets that we threw on there. But again, they're cheap, and they're a component to getting to this point where the shape is right. I like to see, I think like this here is a place where, you know, I'd like to see this get wet, and I think the water and the glue and stuff will relax it. And I'm going to basically sculpt this, and once it's like that, as carefully as I can, and then basically improve upon some of these forms while it's wet, so that when that dries, it's even better. And then we're going to go with a heavy bark texture in terms of another layer of paper that's all the way from top to bottom. So we'll bridge this transition, and any little idiosyncrasies we'll lose after that. But this being wood glue and paper as a substrate, and then wood glue saturated paper finishes, I think will stick right to it really nicely. And then there'll be some air gaps between them, but I don't think that's the end of the world. And then I think we talked about when we're done here, and these need to go away, they're 12 feet tall. I'm going to probably set up another scribing pen like that at 6 feet and scribe a line right on top of the bark when we're all done here on strike day. Scribe a line all the way around, and then add some kind of a key, a positive feature in the base that can stick up, and a negative feature in the upper part that when it sits flat on the floor isn't sticking down on the floor and frigging it up, keeping it from being able to stand there smooth and straight. But then I'll cut that, and I'll cut the key, and we'll set those down in two pieces, and they can sit in like a group, hopefully a consolidated group, to be stored. And then someday a slice of this 16-inch diameter tube with a piece taken out, like I said before. If you slide it down into this one and glue and screw it there, it'll make a nice lead for the upper section to just shoop, especially if I go around the top edge with like a bevel router or just break that edge. Then this will just slide over that and it'll clock to wherever the key fits and sit down into the key, and there'll be a horizontal seam there. But I mean, for the amount of effort that it saves you to be able to set those together and use them, they can use them for a play out here, like the theater class does plays that I'm not paid to work on. The middle school does musicals that I'm not paid to be a part of, and so they'll have these to use. And if we rent them out or something, and it's a real problem for people, they could use a little bit of spackle on that seam and then repaint them, and that'll just crumble and break and fall apart when they go to take them apart next time, or any number of things. So you could do more paper, quick and dirty, to blend it and paint it, and that could be torn again. So not the end of the world, and it'll be a factor of when you store the upper part, the bottom edge of the texture. If it doesn't get banged up too badly, or if I can backfill the negative space between the crinkled paper texture and this substrate layer, if I can backfill that with some kind of expanding foam or a resin of some kind, that could even help hold that out and keep it from being damaged, at least at the edges that come together and where it sits on the floor. So that's my thinking right now. Sounds like an awful lot of work. When I'm wrapping up this project, I'm going to be really stressed out and ready to get out and back onto Ed's basement replacement, which is where we'll be the rest of this year. But for right now, I got to stay focused on this. But anyway, we'll see what this looks like once I get the glue on it. Just try not to miss a step here for posterity. I think this series will make a nice accompaniment to maybe plans or CAD lines for these pieces, and so I want to keep it like educational and exhaustive to a certain extent, so that someone who maybe wants to buy the plans and watch this series would be able to do this themselves pretty quick and easy. So thanks for watching. We'll see you. All right, well, it's handy to have the resources of the institution. I have a battery fan that I failed to bring today, but it wasn't going to compare to this high-speed industrial thing. So we've got that drying out, the glue that I was able to get onto this. And I'm not sure if the microphone's going to be buffeted by the fan air, but I was able to spray, but I did have to water it at least 50%. Looking at it flowing, I was looking at it thinking it's just about like paint, so I tried initially just to spray it just without any water. No go. And I continued to add water until I could get it to come out. It still doesn't want to make a great fan, so it could probably further water down, but at that point I'm getting a lot of running out of it, which looks a lot like this looks. However, that dried pretty quickly, the sprayed watery glue, and so on top of that I was able to brush out straight unwatered down wood glue, and now that's what's drying on top. And I think that's the very least that we're going to need here. I might have been planning on it adding more rigidity than it really will, or at least by the volume of glue. So I just hate to see a surface like that could be broken kind of easily. So I don't know what exactly I'm going to do about that. It'll certainly work for our show. I've wheeled out in Addams Family, which I did make a series about. I did a whole wall with paper and there was nothing on it, and we were just careful with it for the show. And I knew that I was going to rip it down afterward and it wouldn't be a big deal. These, though, there's been a lot of effort put into these, and to destroy the paper and cardboard component is not the end of the world, but it's a great deal of work, fiddly work, that's worth preserving once you get this far. So we're going to continue to make sure and try to put our best foot forward here. It's still kind of soft. I think it will harden up eventually, but I'm looking at some DIY bed liner materials. They're not quite a heavy, hard polyurea coat, but there may be something to that, so I'll see what I can do with it. In the meantime, I could certainly take, after the show, if I'm going to cut them in half for storage, if we had the right weather and or I could get an enclosed trailer or something, I might take those pieces to the bed liner business and have him put a light coat of polyurea on it just out of my own pocket. There's always that option if I think it's worth it, although it's not cheap. So I had another failure here where this opened up on me, even though I had this screwed at about, where is it, maybe 4 inches from the edge all the way along. It's sitting open from here to there at least. if not further. I thought I was careful to back the screws out and then run them back in to get it to tighten. But ideally, I guess I'd throw clamps all the way around this. Try not to bring everything I own down to this project, even though you may not believe me. I could bring a slew of clamps, or I could borrow a bunch from the wood shop. I should have clamped that. And so now I'll be trying to see just how far that goes, and then trying to decide whether to try and get wood glue in there when it's edgeways and then clamp it. That'll be something I tackle today, because I got to have that practically 100% glued to do the biggest sort of root bases out of it. So, oh, this is also what I wanted to show. What do you do when you're trying to notch the end of the post? Now, I did it mathematically before, which kind of isn't the end of the world. It worked out. But if you want to do a really close job here, the thing to do is to set it on top, like I've done here. And I looked at, the gap that's left between the surface of this circle and the surface on the sidewall of the tube all around in all three locations. And I looked at what I had for a gap between this nearer caster wheel bolt. But again, those caster wheels are clocked just visually on that 90 degrees there. I talked about that in a previous video. If I had been more meticulous about that, then I could use the distance between that bolt and the sidewall of the circle more reliably. So the better thing to check is between the sidewall of this circle and the sidewall of the tube, and see that that's roughly even, which is what I've got here. And then I'll just use a simple square, a speed square, and I'll just slide along the bottom and come over here and stop and use that to make a mark on both sides, or and then I can translate that up. However, I think these are tall, however tall I think this is. In between those two lines, I can make a cut. And I'll just make a note here, maybe one mark on this and one mark on the sidewall to be sure I've got it clocked correctly when I come back. But then it ought to fit down there more closely to this shape, and then I can glue that if I choose to glue it. Which before, on the other one, I didn't choose to glue it because I had a pretty good gap there, so I wasn't about to fill it. Anyway, that's a nicer way to do that. So that's that. All right, we'll see you.